I represent here the International Organization for Migration, IOM, and you would think, why an international organization for migration, the climate talks? So our objective is to bring migration on the climate agenda and to bring migration in the negotiation, because climate has an impact on people mobility, and also because people mobility has an impact, in fact, on climate change as well. So we are, I think, at the heart of the negotiation from a human and social and economic point of view.
Okay, can you give us some concrete examples of how people perhaps are already affected through migration? Perhaps the Philippines would be a good example.
Yes, unfortunately, we have just at the moment of this COP terrible situation in the Philippines with the typhoon that just hit the country and that led to clear displacement of people. And even the president of the COP mentioned the displacement of people in his opening speech. So we know that over 500,000 people were displaced and moved because of the typhoon. But that's just one very sad and tragic example, but very visible, because it's really the sudden onset, the disaster that hits, and people are either forced to move, or on the contrary, sometimes they can't move, and these are the people who are the most vulnerable. But you have also different examples of climate change impacts that are slow onset: degradation, desertification, ocean acidification. All these issues build together an impact on people's lives, on people's livelihoods, and migration is one of the responses in this context.
How can this meeting help those people?
We have very, very clear and specific expectation of the COP and of the UNFCCC and climate negotiation in general, but of this COP in particular. We have two main gateways, two main doors to bring migration today here in Warsaw in the climate change negotiation. One is through the lenses of the adaptation programs, so the national adaptation plans, for instance. They are reviewing guidelines on the NAPs, and we are here also to say that migration should be part of this process, and that we can also provide capacity to governments to bring migration in the NAPs. That's one entry door. And then the second very important entry door that it's building on last year's COP in Doha, it's the loss and damage dimension. So here again, there is a possibility to have a decision on loss and damage. We have already human mobility that is mentioned in one of the technical papers that is discussed here on the non-economic losses. So we have already migration there. There's in the Cancun text migration. We have in the Doha text migration. But what we want here is to be able to acknowledge that people will move and are moving because of climate change, and to support action through very concrete loss and damage if we talk of forced form of migration, or adaptation if we speak of more voluntarily form of migration. So migration is across the spectrum of solutions and around the whole circle of people's livelihoods. We will always talk of people moving, and so we need to take this into account here.
And do you think that a loss and damage mechanism is necessary as part of that?
I think that it's very important to understand the whole complexity of mobility, human mobility, and of migration in the context of climate change, and to really think in a continuum. So migration can be in a way to reduce the costs of loss and damage. Allowing people to move on time in a planned, prepared way will reduce the cost of the impact of a disaster, as we saw, for instance, in the Philippines. So this would increase, in a way, the resilience of people. So less need for compensation and bringing money for losses. But in the same time, we have to acknowledge that a lot of migration will happen in a displacement form, in a forced form. And in this case, it has to be thought indeed within also concretely the loss and damage mechanism.